One. Hi, everybody. We're back today with another installment of Secret Societies with War Hamster Brady. Hi, Brady.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
And I was more than happy to get bumped today because you had some pretty nice invitations, and I'm going to check out those shows over the weekend.
Cool. Yeah, it was very interesting because obviously we have now an international audience, and talking with the people from foreign countries and their understanding of what Gladio is so refreshing because they've lived it. Not that we haven't lived it, but we don't even know what it is. And those people live through the exposure in many cases. And so it's always enlightening for me. I always learn something by talking to people outside of the United States and their interpretation of what's going on in the world. So I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, I had Paul Williams on and got to fangirl for a couple of hours. Then was on sit rep last night. So had a busy day. Plus I watched my grandbaby, which is the best part of all of that.
There you go. End with the most important part.
Yep.
Well, hopefully we do a bit of that today. I always like to kind of do a mic drop for the final little factoid when we're doing these. I may have a fun one today.
Okay.
Let's start with, let's do a quick shout out. Our friend.
Oh, I do have to say something, Brady.
You may.
Paul Williams mentioned McCloy yesterday. And he asked me, he says, "You do know who he is, don't you?" And I said, "Oh, yes, sir. I know who he is."
My favorite.
But I thought of you immediately.
Excellent. Oops, where is that? Okay. Start with a screen share.
Okay, hold on. Gotta get my cursor up there.
That's Mr. JFK. Courtesy of our mutual friend on Twitter, Bobby Powell. Thanks for reminding me about this great quote. From JFK says, "The word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings." It goes on. It's not on the screen share, but it says, "We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it." So I thought that was a pretty good quote to start our subject matter today.
Yes.
So last week we left off with Henry Stimson. Of course, that's where the John J. McCloy reference came from. Well, McCloy pops up in almost every time we talk.
Yeah.
But Stimson takes us right up until the 1880s. He was class of 1888. I'm going to go back a year from 1887 and take us through the beginning of the 20th century as we do this chronologically. And I've got some fun connections today. You ready to rock?
Yep.
All right. Let me see if I can. I forgot to prepare the. Give me 1 second. Cover up some dead air because I forgot to show the pictures of these gentlemen.
Okay. Yeah. The interesting thing to me, since we just mentioned McCloy, is the amount of times these people from like professional career fields end up in play in what's supposedly intelligence. And they end up overseas in positions of authority, managing foreigners, and then they turn that knowledge that they gain into profits for their handlers back in the United States. And that to me is, since we're going through the 1800s, early 1900s, as I've said often, the combination of all of that is transferred into the CIA. Did we lose you, Brady?
No, just had to go off camera for 1 second. I'm still here.
Yeah, so we folded all of that capability, the executives, the corporate espionage, all of those functions, the Justice Department piece of this gets folded into the CIA post World War II. So it's very interesting to go back and look at how they did it prior to that, so that you can understand why they selected Alan Dulles, who was a Sullivan and Cromwell lawyer, and why they picked Frank Wisner, and why they picked Paul Helliwell, and all of these different people, Wild Bill Donovan, with all of their connections to set up the OSS and then the CIA, because they were doing all of this all along.
Well, going back to the overarching theory that we're trying to prove or disprove or let people figure out for themselves when it comes to secret societies and our focus on Skull and Bones is, the theory is that this is a secret society of people that do more than just network. They are actively working together as a secret club to implement their version of a new world order. And they've been doing so for such a long time, putting their people in these basically bottleneck positions of power throughout the State Department, through the legal system, in the business community, in the clergy, in the intelligence agencies especially. And we see the fingerprints of the same people and the same families throughout the generations. They intermarry, they do business together. They, one generation will hire someone from the next, all connecting to Skull and Bones. And yeah, we're suggesting there may be something nefarious about it, but without actively saying so. And that's what we're doing, is drawing these connections so people can draw their own conclusion. And there's a reason to, the counter argument is fair. They're a bunch of wealthy people that all went to the same school. They share a lot of common interests. Of course, they're going to marry each other. That's their social circle. Of course, they're going to hire people they know. That's just networking. Well, I guess I'm here to suggest that maybe it's a little bit more. Decide for yourself.
Well, it can be both. It can be all of those things and used for evil ends.
Yeah. And that's when you got to start getting into some of the mystical side of the Skull and Bones. And we haven't really dove into that yet. That's not my area of expertise. Maybe we got to have like Matt Aron on for that one of these days.
Yeah.
He's pretty good on that, on the occult stuff.
Yeah.
But that is definitely present.
Absolutely.
We could comment on it, but I'd be doing an amateurish job, and I'd rather get someone in who's actually studied that in depth. So, class of 1887. And just for the audience, we've got a couple of good lists of Skull and Bones, and I've got them sorted chronologically, and we're starting from oldest to newest. And I could probably, we could do a few minutes on just about every single name on there, but I'm just highlighting the ones that really show these connections. And I may miss one or two that you think is interesting. If so, leave a comment, and we can always go back and do that. The next one I thought that made a lot of attention was a guy by the name of Oliver Gould Jennings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that last name Gould should ring a bell, because Jay Gould was one of the robber barons who pops up throughout some of these stories. And you'll hear more about him in a little bit. But this guy is somehow a relative of the Gould family. And as we've been talking since the first of these series, Colonel, these people they are so proud of their heritage that they will keep their name, their mother's maiden name, whatever their last name. So you always see these people with a middle name. Will be, if it's a Vanderbilt, if your mom's descended from Vanderbilt, so you'll keep that name. And it really does open the doors,
Right.
So this is some pictures, if you want to throw this up there, of Oliver Gould Jennings. There's him in his top hat, famous picture of him. There's the Maylands estate, which I guess that's where he built and retired. But a very serious man. Like nice whiskers here. I like that. But that is the gentleman we're going to look at right now, Oliver Gould Jennings. So why is he special? Okay, what was he? He was an American financier, and he's one of the heirs to the Standard Oil fortune. Standard Oil, of course, is Rockefeller. His aunt Almira Geraldine Goodsell was the wife of the Standard Oil co-founder William A. Rockefeller Jr. That's the brother of John D. Rockefeller. William A. Rockefeller was also the co-owner of Anaconda Copper. And that's not a household name, but in the 1920s, it was the fourth largest company in the world. So that's where Oliver Gould Jennings comes from. We haven't really talked about the Rockefeller family. So do you want to, because they're tied into an awful lot of this, and we haven't really talked about them.
Well, Anaconda copper is very, very important as we find out, because just like with these secret societies, these corporations also have their own kind of spawned offspring, if you will, and the anaconda copper comes up often when we go around the world and look at many of these different countries that we've overthrown and who had concessions at the time to the copper that was found in those countries. And that's where I first came in contact with anaconda copper. Is there were many countries that we went in, because as a matter of fact, one of them initially was Chile and Mexico. The anaconda copper's portion of there was two different major mines there. One of them ended up through some acquisition belonging to Freeport mining, but Anaconda was intimately involved in Chile, which, as we know, they were paying like their miners pennies on the dollar, and their unionization is one of the things that led to the overthrow of the Allende government and the CIA putting Pinochet in. So I didn't want to gloss over Anaconda because it is hugely important to the resource piece of Operation Gladio and why they go in and overthrow governments.
Yeah, it's one of the United Fruit Companies, the poster child for the banana republics. And that's why they call them banana republics. But yeah, the mining companies are littered with it.
Rio Tinto. Anaconda's right up there at the top.
And Anaconda will come back up again later today. So I'm glad you highlighted that, because that's not the only mention we'll have of that. I just want to read a couple quick anecdotes about the founder of the Rockefeller family. This guy named William Avery Rockefeller Sr. They called him Devil Bill for a reason. He was a con artist. Changed his name to Bill Livingston, Dr. Bill Livingston, to be a snake oil salesman. Called himself a botanic physician who sold elixirs. My favorite trick that he did is he would lend money to farmers at 12% or more, hoping that they could default and he could steal their land. He used to pretend to be deaf and dumb. He used to brag that I cheat my sons every chance I get because I want to make them sharp. The fun one was that he there's an anecdote about his housekeeper was a woman named Anne Vanderbrake who's accused of raping. And I found the legal, announcement of Rockefeller's alleged crimes. And the language is pretty hilarious if you wanted me to read a quick paragraph.
Sure.
This is 1800. So it says that William A. Rockefeller, late of the town of Moravia in the county of Cayuga, on the first day of May in the year of the Lord 1848, with force and arms at the town of Moravia in said county, in and upon one Anne Vanderbrake, in the peace of God with the people of the state of New York, then and there being violently did make an assault on her. The said Anne Vanderbrake, then and there make violently and against her will feloniously did ravish and carnally know. Sorry, that cracked me up.
Okay.
It's not exactly the FBI most wanted poster you'd normally expect. But I like that. And carnally know.
Yep.
So that is Devil Bill Rockefeller, of which all the Rockefeller, John David and William Avery Rockefeller, descended. And this guy, Oliver Gould Jennings, a bonesman in 1887, is related. It's descended from that. So what makes him so special? Well, he would serve on a number of, we're going to get into some of the boards of directors today. This is a lot of these people do. They would serve on multiple boards of multinational corporations, meaning they are the ones steering the ships. So he sat on the boards of Bethlehem Steel, the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company, Kingsport Press, National Fuel Gas, And the big one here is McKesson and Robbins, which is now known as McKesson, which is the biggest healthcare company in America and the 9th largest company by revenue in the world. And it's been around a long time. So that's Jennings, Oliver Gould Jennings sat on those boards. It gets fun. His older sister was Emma Brewster Jennings, and she would marry a gentleman by the name of Hugh Dudley Auchincloss.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is our first introduction to the Auchincloss family. We'll be talking a lot more about them when we get into the other secrets, one of the other secret societies of Yale, which is, of course, Scroll and Key. But Auchincloss is worth mentioning. He's a Yale alumni. Interestingly, his second wife was Nina Vidal. She was the, Gore Vidal is the
son.
yeah, a relative, yeah. But the Gore family is really interesting. I don't know if our recent Gore is related, probably, but they were one of the 19 families who sold their property to found Washington, D.C. So that's where they made the money. Gore Vidal was a writer who was very famous for feuding with William Buckley. William Buckley, of course, was Skull and Bones.
And do you know that Paul Williams used to work for William Buckley?
I did not know that.
Neither did I until yesterday.
I'd love to hear his opinion.
I mean, I think I did. I think I read that somewhere in one of his biographies. But yeah, he was an FBI informant and an amazing life, actually.
Interesting. Oh, just a couple other Auchincloss connections. Hugh Dudley Auchincloss, who married Gould Jennings' sister, had a third wife by the name of Janet Lee Bouvier. Of course, Bouvier is the mother of former First Lady Jackie Kennedy.
Correct.
Keeping it in the family. Next the other big thing to know is they bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1931 in the middle of the crash. But that's Oliver Gould Jennings with some very interesting connections. And I brought him up because I wanted to introduce the Auchincloss family to this show, because we are going to be talking about them more. Anything else you want to add on Jennings?
No. Do you know if there's a I had a note that where it says he married Bouvier, the Jackie Kennedy's mother, that they had children, Janet Jennings and James Lee. And the Janet Jennings one, I was just wondering, because she ended up marrying a Rutherford. And I was wondering if he's any relation to the Rutherfords that we know,
Yeah, like I would imagine so. I mean, you know how they treat their names. They never go away.
Right.
It's pretty incestuous.
So Winthrop Rutherford was his grandfather. Frank Polk was his grandfather as well. So yeah, I'm sure they're all related. Never mind.
We're talking about blue bloods.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
All right.
That's hilarious.
Next name that popped up here is 1888, and I have to go through this guy because this guy's been haunting my life since college. And you've heard of him with your economics background. You know the next name. It's named Irving Fisher.
Yep.
Irving Fisher is a very, very bright guy. He's an economist, a statistician, an inventor, and a very famous eugenicist. I'm going to get a little wonky on the economic stuff, just because this is, that was my field of study, and that's why this guy drives me nuts. He's an early neoclassical economist, post-Keynesian school. For those who don't know, John Maynard Keynes is pretty much considered the father of the modern economic system. This guy was, probably even just as influential. Keynesian economics is, his theory is the reason our government thinks it can borrow forever. Monetarism, all that good stuff. This Fisher was actually called the greatest economist the U.S. has ever produced by none other than Milton Friedman and James Tobin. So this is no lightweight. He would come up with what's called the utility theory, general equilibrium principles, known as the father of monetarism. So if you complain about the government debt, point your finger at this guy. Even to this day, I run into the Fisher equation, which is basically real interest rates minus nominal interest rates. Real interest rates equal nominal interest rates minus inflation. Pretty simple, but it was revolutionary at the time. It's how we price bonds. And then you start adding in the time value of money, all that stuff. But this is all from Fisher. You also have the Fisher hypothesis, which I'm sure you've run into, and the International Fisher effect. And what he says about the Fisher hypothesis is real interest rates are unaffected by monetary policy, which is hogwash. Because
100% hogwash.
You print more money, you're going to cause inflation. Interest rates are related to inflation. But these guys, remember, a lot of these Skull&Bones people, they have dinners with each other. They have these conversations. They're talking about this stuff. And a lot of these people do things like work for the Treasury, work for the State Department. We see them in the New York Federal Reserve. So they may be pushing theories that end up being hogwash, but these theories are getting into the ears of the people who actually set policy.
So I would even go so far as to say, now that I know what I know, looking back at some of their theories, they were actually propagandist. They're not any different than today when the CIA pays a university for a study to say what they want it to say, so they can then use that in the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID to go overthrow a government. This is the exact same thing. These people are an economist only can make a living being an economist if somebody's going to hire them to do economist kind of things. And these people were basically a PR mouthpiece or a propagandist for whoever's going to be their benefactor, in my way of thinking.
And what you're saying is these benefactors, or you're suggesting, not saying, but these people have an incentive. They want the government to have more money so they can give out more favors to the insiders and the cronies.
Correct.
These are the people writing the checks for the economists. These are the people who fund the endowments of the colleges, who then train future generations of economists to keep spitting out the same rubbish.
Yeah, it's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Or a circle jerk.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of. Yeah, that's exactly right. I agree with you on this, 100%. So his reputation kind of took a beating. This is pretty funny. 9 days before the Wall Street crash of 1929, he had a famous quote. He says, "The stock market has reached a permanently high plateau." It's one of the worst market calls since Jim Cramer. For the record, 9 days later, the market would crash. It would not reach that permanently high plateau again until World War II. Basically, 20 years later to get back to where he said it would never drop below.
And again, the allegation is, in hindsight, that he said that not to spook the herd, because they being the people that paid him, were already moving their assets, and they did not want to spook the rest of the people that they really wanted to negatively impact with a crashed market.
Yeah, and there's some truth to the fact that they crashed the market to go after Bank of New York. There is some truth to that. That's been found in writings and diaries over the years. I don't think anybody's ever written that book completely.
Yeah.
Although I'll think of the gentleman's name. He gave it. The Fruits of Graft was a book, and I had that guy on my channel really early on. I'll try to remember his name. Talked about it a little bit. A couple more things on Mr. Fisher. Oh, here's a good one for him. He was a proponent of what they call full reserve banking. What we have today is fractional reserve banking, where a bank, you deposit $1,000, they got to keep $100 on hand and can lend out the other $900. That's fractional reserve. He wanted it that you could only lend out money that you had 1-to-1 ratio. You would never have a run on the banks, but it would. It's interesting. Without getting too wonky, allowing the banks to leverage their balance sheets to some degree allows more lending, which causes economic growth. if you have a 1-to-1 ratio like it used to be with gold, your economy doesn't grow as fast. This is where you get velocity of money. And he was pushing against that, which seems to run counter to what most of his backers would have wanted. And a lot of them are bankers. So it's interesting that he was that proponent. Anyways, he had some reasons behind it. The other important thing to know about Fisher, he was a gigantic eugenicist, co-founder of the Race Betterment Foundation in 1906, and he was the first president of the American Eugenics Society. Why does that matter, Colonel?
Oh my gosh. So interesting when you go back, because that seems to be one of the common traits of the fascist in controlling people and forced sterilization and the breeding patterns of people and stuff like that. So the early Huxley's, the Oswald Mosley, all of the Fabian Society, based off of major eugenicist work. And it was their work, along with Margaret Sanger, who Hitler cited for his, Aryan race type of fanaticism. And so there's always seems to be this strand of eugenicists, because if you're going to control the population, which is basically Gladio, is controlling the population through chaos, you also, once you have them controlled, want to ensure that you are producing or encouraging to produce the maximum slave capability for the mouths you're going to feed. And a lot of the eugenicist policies centered around keeping the African they believed Africans were much more physically performance-based than the white race. And so if you are of the white race, but you are not one of them, they encouraged breeding in order to make you a more productive slave, because that's what you were going to end up being.
Yeah, very much so. And the early eugenicists became the technocrats. As we talked about when we did the Bush family episode a few weeks ago, these are the same people who would end up financing the Nazis. So, yeah. And it's these are the same people 100 years earlier financed Charles Darwin. The survival of the fittest was a theory. And this feeds right into the class system that we're talking about here. The blue bloods thought that they were a superior breed. It's why you'll see some of these families, some of the stories we'll get to, you'll see, third son, Roger, got disinherited because he married someone that we didn't approve of.
Right.
It really was all about that. Interestingly enough, the technocrats, who were really influential in the 20s and 30s, would completely disappear from power after some of the experiments the Nazis were doing became known to the world. Eugenicists and technocracy disappeared from the lexicon for about 100 years. But it's not that hard to make a case that today, the people really running all these agencies, the bureaucrats, these are technocrats. They never went away. They just stopped using those terms.
And probably one of the most interesting things, his name came up when I was doing some research when Brian first came out here about the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
Which I thought was completely crazy. But he was one of the first advocates of no red meat, stay away from alcohol, and stay away from tobacco. And keep in mind, back then, tobacco was not filtered. And one of the things that they say about that, adding the filter and all of the additives that they've now added, is what causes the cancer piece of it. But that tobacco itself, as a nightshade plant, is actually very beneficial to you and very healthy, actually. And I was just reading where the lady that had lived to 120 degrees and had like a pound of dark chocolate every day and a glass of port wine at the end of every day. And very, very healthy. And obviously, we know red meat's actually good for you because of the cholesterol going to your brain. So you have a eugenicist telling you to not eat the things that are most beneficial to you, because he doesn't want you to know that.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. I've got some people lined up to do a future series on my channel about technocracy. We'll go into a lot more depth. But yeah, that's 100% true. We're on the same page there.
Yeah.
So I thought having a eugenicist as part of our Skull and Bones family tree was pretty important, because it connects him to a lot of the other ideologically connected to a lot of the things that we would see happen in the 20th century. All right, the next fun name I have for you. Class of 1892. Oh, I didn't give you a picture of Mr. See if I can find him again. Well, we'll go into our next one.
He actually looks a lot like my grandpa.
Sure
does.
Interesting looks back then. Next guy we're going to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Pierre J. And here's Pierre for you. Handsome young lad. So why is he important? Yale, Skull and Bones, class of 1892. He would grow up on what's known as the J Estate in Rye, New York, which is the ancestral home of his great-great-grandfather, a guy by the name of John Jay. And if you familiar with John Jay?
Yeah.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with Revolutionary War history, he is one of the more prominent founding fathers. He was the negotiator for the United States at the Treaty of Paris when we made peace with Great Britain. He was one of the Federalist Papers co-authors, along with Hamilton and Madison, as they were going around mostly New York trying to get them to ratify the Constitution. He was the first Secretary of State of the United States. Notice the Secretary of State always comes from one of these families. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he would decline a second term in 1800 after the Federalists got destroyed in the election, mostly due to the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798, which was about as draconian as we've ever seen of censorship in America. But him stepping down is why we got John Marshall, who would serve as the Supreme Court Justice for 35 years and completely changed the Article 3 of the Constitution. John Jay is also the second governor of New York, so he's a pretty important guy. That's who this guy descends from. So I think Pierre J was invited to the right parties?
Yes.
So what did he do for a living? What else did he do that's important? Well, he's a banker with New York Old Colony Trust Company in Boston. He co-founded a company called Fiduciary Trust Company International, which was absorbed by someone we all know today, Franklin Templeton. What he really is best known for is he was the very first chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. So you've got all these bankers meet on Jekyll Island in 1911, and they create the Federal Reserve, and they have to create these 9 member banks, most important one of which has always been the New York Fed, and they put a Bonesman as the very first chairman.
Got to start it off right.
That's the pattern, isn't it?
Yes.
So he get involved in some other interesting stuff. He was then sent to Berlin to be a member of the transfer committee under the Dawes Plan. This is after, for those who don't know, after World War I, we had the Treaty of Versailles, where a number of our heroes of our story were there, especially the Dulles brothers. Well, afterwards, basically they had said Germany had to pay something like $20 billion of reparations to the rest of Europe for a war they didn't start and a war they didn't lose. So they lost the peace negotiation, what happened to Germany. The Dawes Plan was all about German reparations to allies. It would be succeeded by a successor called the Young Plan in 1929. But what happened is it made the German government, to make all these reparations, had to print a ton of money, which led to hyperinflation. And they relied on foreign loans. And as we now know, those loans came prominently from banks like Brown Brothers Harriman and some of these other blue blood Wall Street banks. And it was important for the Allies to penalize Germany, because they were up to Germany at actually 34% of the world trade. That's how successful their industry was. And they wanted to crush them economically. And that really set up what they did with this hyperinflation in Germany, in Weimar Germany, really paved the way for Hitler to rise to power.
Yep.
And we know who financed, the Nazis. Once again, that's same people.
Same people. Always the same people.
Yeah. So think there's any kind of a pattern, any coincidence that he was there doing the German reparations into the Dawes Plan?
Along with all the other people in the aftermath of World War II that are the villains? No,
Oh, yeah.
no coincidence at all.
Yeah. I mean, this was completely architected, everything that happened in the early 20th century. And I guess what I'm suggesting is Skull&Bones members just seem to pop up in an awful lot of those conversations. Must be a coincidence, right?
Must be.
You want me to add? You want have anything you want to add on, Mr. J?
I think it's interesting that he's also related to the Beers family, the Beers, which traces back to some very interesting connections in Chicago. But definitely one of the blue bloods.
Yeah. It's probably been to a few debutante balls.
A few.
I can honestly say I've never been invited to a debutante ball. They just
Well,
don't
you're
have
past your time now. You won't go.
what might be fun just once. It's, now that I'm up here in the Northeast, I kind of know some of the muckety mucks, or I've met a few through my in-laws. I think I'd probably decline that kind of invitation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, Renee, I'm not talking about the De Beers, Debeers, just Beers, Beers. And I came across them doing some research into the Swift family and some of the mafia, the Pritzkers in Chicago. I came across the Beers family. So I just thought that was a very interesting connection. That was his grandparents on the other side.
I didn't have that, so that's great information. And I don't know the Beers family. And Renee, I thought it might be related to De Beers as well, because sometimes people will come here and change their name. But
now that may be, but I don't know that. It was definitely just the Beers family.
We'll have to go to genealogy.com and hope they actually got something right.
Yeah, Harriet Post was her name, and then she married the Beers family. So I don't know if the Post family is related to the actual Post, as in the cereal Post, but whatever. We can do that all day.
There's it's all along for fair play. As a comment, veiled profit in St. Louis. I'm sorry, veiled profit ball in St. Louis. Sure veiled some profits. Says Walker Farm Street, H.W. Bush. Yeah, I know a little bit about what you're talking about, but yeah, I don't get invited to those parties, Colonel.
Well, you're marrying into a family that you may get a few invites. So just saying.
We'll see.
I'm going to be reading about Brady in one of these geology things.
What's actually really funny is the last couple of get together holiday type things, dinners. They've got some families that are prominent academics here in the Northeast, and one guy is a local professor of economics, and he and I started talking, and there's about 10 people at the table, and within an hour we're going back and forth on the macroeconomics. Everyone else on the table was just glued to our conversation. This guy teaches at PhD level, and he goes, how's a middle class guy without all these PhDs, how do you know all this stuff? It was a great conversation, super nice people.
But you lived it. And that's what I've come to realize is when you talk to academics, you were a Wall Street banker. You didn't just stay in an academic setting. The way an academic becomes credible is actually doing, like my economics professor at Indiana University actually did throughout the whole summer, and on the side was the economic advisor to the city of Louisville, Kentucky. And she had real world economic stories to tell an economic class. We didn't just talk about theories. She actually did studies for the IRS. And so again, she had real life jobs in order to be able to portray theories, which to me made it much more interesting than just sitting and listening to a bunch of, supply and demand garbage.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And this gentleman I'm referring to, this professor, he made his bones in the real world first, and then got invited into academia. And
And so you're his touch back to the real world once you get it. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, those conversations are the most fascinating to me.
Yeah, I just, it was interesting. Because he's very left wing, and I probably can't be considered that. So everyone was kind of wondering how we'd get along. Ended up working out really well. All right, back to track. Don't need to hear about my middle class life anymore. Here's a fun one. Class of 1892. Guy by the name of Thomas Lee McClung. And I'll give you a quick picture of him. He's a handsome lad. See that big rush? See that great jawline of this guy, Lee McClung? He was a very famous college football player at Yale. Back in the days, Yale won the national championship almost every year, but in his 4 years, his team went 54-2.
Wow.
They outscored the teams in his 4 years, 2,269 points to 49. He was the captain of the famous 1891 team that went 13-0 and outscored their opponent 488-0.
Who knew?
Yeah, he's a football legend. He was also made College Football Hall of Fame in 1963. But he did more than just play football. So the other thing I should add is a lot of these Skull and Bones guys were college athletes. They looked for the well-rounded Renaissance man. Remember,
they also all graduated from what we would refer to as prep schools. None of these people went to normal schools.
Very, very few. And, there's also another pattern that pops up. They went to their undergrad at Yale, and then they go to Harvard Law.
Yes.
That's important when we start talking about the Constitution, because there's basically 3 people in history that you can probably credit for changing the way our judiciary system works. And a lot of that comes out of Harvard Law. Guy by the name of...
It's also a breeding ground for CIA.
Yeah, of course. It's got to be named Joseph Story did a lot of the damage there, but I'm not going to get into that. But since we are talking about the legal system, Thomas Lee McClung is actually directly descended from the second Supreme Court Justice of America, John Marshall.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's impressive.
We have a John Jay and a John Marshall in order in Skull and Bones. And remember how many Bonesmen we eventually became Supreme Court justices?
I don't remember the number. Tell me.
It was like 3 or 4 chief justices, which is just amazing. Out of 17?
Out of one school.
Yeah.
One secret society.
And we just found 2 more that are related to previous. So here's Thomas Lee McClung. Gets out of school, coaches for a couple of years, and then goes to work. Worked for Southern Railroad, as a lot of these guys did. At a very young age, he would become the treasurer of Yale. And then, that's his entire background: football, Southern Railroad, and treasurer of Yale. In 1909, the President of the United States appoints him the treasurer of the United States.
But what would he have done as the treasurer of Yale?
They were doing some restructuring back then, but probably running the endowment for the most part.
Yes. And then who would you be talking to when you're running the endowment?
Oh, some of the blue bloods.
All of the other Skull and Bones that were paying into Yale as alumni. And so what I have noticed is some of these jobs that you would normally just kind of gloss over. This is the guy that was going out and soliciting funds and investing the funds that they received into the people, the other blue blood, right? So it's so important that you can't emphasize this enough. So yeah, he has railroad experience. And so who's the railroad guys? Rockefeller, Carnegie, and all of these others. And so where is this guy who's the treasurer going to be investing their funds in Yale into these blue blood companies of the Rockefeller, Standard Oil, the Carnegies, the blah, 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 Ford. And so it's very important to understand the kind of circle for these guys to then, and then, like you said, he launches this treasury job right up into the United States. And so who was he greasing the palms of with the Yale money endowments to pave his future?
Yeah. So at the age of 39, he becomes a U.S. Treasury without a whole lot of experience doing what a treasury's. But remember, who was president in 1909?
Taft.
And what group was Taft a member of? Skull&Bones.
Yeah.
So is it more than just networking, or we have a little bit of cronyism going on here?
And again, what are you going to do as the Secretary of Treasury, but basically do what he was just doing for Yale?
Yeah. And let's see, what year, how long did he do the Treasury? He was there till 1912. So he basically paved the way. And what came after him, of course, was the Wilson administration, Federal Reserve Bank, 1913, World War I, etc. But he was the guy guarding the hen house prior to that.
Yeah, he set us up.
There's not much about him after that. At least nothing worth talking about. But he did he had his moment in the sun. Okay, let's go to another name. How about Francis Burton Harrison? Does that name ring a bell?
Francis Harrison. Not off the top of my head.
You're going to enjoy this one because this circles back to a lot of the stories you've been telling. So here is Francis Burton Harrison. Clean cut lad. Oops.
Oh, hold on.
There he is. Francis Burton Harrison. Okay, that's enough of you, Francis. So why is he important? Stop me, because this is about 5 or 6 touch points. You're just going to want to jump all over. So just jump in anytime you want.
Okay.
First of all, his father was Burton Harrison, was the private secretary to the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. That said, he grew up in New York. He was an American Filipino statesman.
Oh. That's not good.
Yeah, he served as the captain in the Army during the Spanish-American War. Became a congressman in New York from 1907 to 1913. Gets fun here. One of his last.
Hold on. Was he in the Philippines when he was in the Army?
Where was he stationed? I should have that here.
I bet he was, since they made him the governor.
So through his mother, Harrison was the great-grandson of Virginia planter Thomas Fairfax.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, he later left to serve in the United States Army during the Spanish-American War and was an assistant adjutant general with a rank of captain. Doesn't say where he was stationed.
So I'm gonna guess that he was in the Philippines, because otherwise you would not have been appointed the governor of the Philippines. Because we had a lot of people that actually served in the Philippines. And I do know of 2 others that ended up in that position, both of which served during the Spanish-American. And just so everybody knows, when we took the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba from the Spanish at the end of the Spanish-American War, all of those countries, but specifically the Philippines, had been fighting for decades for freedom. And we went in and annihilated every nationalist in the Philippines with our army to ensure that we were going to use the Philippines from then on as our foot in the door into Asia. And we annihilated anyone who was there that had been fighting the Spanish for decades. And that was the whole voodoo thing where they stuck a pick in the guy's neck and created 2 look like fang holes so that they could say that it was a vampire that got him, and they like turned him upside down and bled him out. That's what our army did to the people in the Philippines. So just saying.
Well, and this guy's fingerprints would have been all over it because he was there the entire time. He got appointed as the Governor General of the Philippines by Woodrow Wilson in 1913. He pushed something called the Philippine Autonomy Act. So the Filipinos loved him. Now, what was he doing behind the scenes? You just kind of hinted at that story. He would come back and be the runner-up for the Democratic candidate for president in 1920. He didn't get the nomination. He finished second. Later in his life, he'd be the U.S. advisor to the president of the Philippine Commonwealth from 1935 to 1946, as well as advisor to the next 4 presidents of the Philippine Republic from 1946 onwards. So this guy had
Wait.
Yep.
So this guy was actively involved in Golden Lily.
I don't see how he couldn't have. He would have had to have been.
100% he had to be, because the next 4 presidents are the ones that were looking feverishly for the gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's this guy. He's a bonesman.
What the hell?
Yeah, but he's basically got the ear. He's probably the most important American in the Philippines from 1913 to like 1965. That's 50 years of this guy's influence on the Philippines.
Oh, I also like the fact that he was responsible for drafting and getting passed the regulated and taxed production, importation, and distribution of opiates and cocoa products.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. One of his last acts was as a congressman. He proposed what's called the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, and that was in response to Smoking Opium Exclusion Act of 1909. And his big issue was they were smuggling opium into America across. Apparently, we had a porous southern border with Mexico.
Oh, what? We also had a porous Canada one, by the way. The same one that was bringing in the alcohol during the Prohibition began bringing in the drugs the same way.
Yeah, he would actually serve on the International Opium Convention of 1912. Now, how many of these Skull and Bones people have their family fortune was made in the opium trade? And how many of them were involved in the intelligence agencies that continued the opium trade?
Well, their families were all definitely involved, especially the maritime ones. But holy moly, that's crazy.
Yeah, I thought he was worthy of our discussion. Mr. Francis Burton Harrison.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's amazing.
Yep. What do we say? That these connections never stop.
Oh, look at that. And his wife's dad was a railroad and mining magnate from California. Southern Pacific Railroad VP, Charles Frederick Crocker.
I wonder, do we have any Crockers in Skull and Bones? Let me check my list real quick.
That's really, really interesting. So,
Nope, I got no Crockers.
Yeah. And this is crazy. Oh my gosh. Okay. This is so fun.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm working on putting all this stuff together in a mirror board and tying it to all the other stuff, but that's months and months of work. It's not ready for presentation yet, but I'm getting there. It'd be a lot of fun if I could just show all these connections. All the spider webs. I am working on that. I've been doing it for a while, but it's a long project. And
I don't know how any of that works.
We'll get there. You'll love it once I show it to you. Oops, what did that just do? All right, next name on our list. Well, I had to have someone from this family show up. This is Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt.
Oh, hold on. There we go.
There we go. There's Alfred Gwynn in a top hat, looking very svelte. Well, Alfred Gwynn, why is he important besides the points of Vanderbilt? Of course he is. He was class of, I have it here, 1899. So we're almost done with the 19th century. Okay, a lot of Vanderbilt history coming here. He was the third son of Cornelius Vanderbilt II and Alice Claypool Gwynn, which is where he got his middle name. Alice, his mom, was a descendant of Roger Williams, who's the founder of Rhode Island. Cornelius II was the favorite grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, who's known as the original robber baron. He would have a steamship business to California for the gold rush. When the gold rush happened in 1849, they had to get the gold back to the East Coast. And the best way to do it, because the Continental Railroad hadn't been built yet, was to take it by steamship. The Vanderbilt's own steamships. They had to take it down to Panama, where it would go across the continent by mule and by train. Vanderbilt proposes a canal across Nicaragua. And we know, this is all this branch of the Vanderbilts. And obviously that leads into all of our stories about Panama and Nicaragua.
Yes.
Really started with the gold rush. So they're big in steamships. And during the Civil War, you heard about the famous Virginia, which is also known as the Merrimack.
Yes.
Well, the steamship that countered it was finally accepted was the Vanderbilt. It was in the Civil War. Basically, they just armored up the steamship and put a ram on it. And that basically leveled the playing field in the Civil War in the naval battle. So that's these Vanderbilts. And of course, this is Cornelius Vanderbilt II, Alfred's father. He had a huge rivalry with Jay Gould over the shipping steamships in the Erie. It's called the Erie Wars, but after Lake Erie, where they tried to bankrupt each other. Vanderbilt ended up winning that battle, and the gold sort of faded from prominence. But we saw a gold earlier today. Mm-hmm. Same families. Okay, so Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt. Nice little background he's got. He's 22 years old. He's graduated from Yale, and was out with some friends taking a world tour, and they're over in Japan. And he gets the news that his father has died and left him as the head of that entire branch of the family at 22 years old. So he rushes home. He would then get married to a Ellen Tuck French, who happened to be really good friends with his sister, who is Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who married Harry Payne Whitney, who we talked about earlier, who's Skull&Bones.
Right.
Their only son, his only son, Alfred's, was William Henry Vanderbilt III, who would become the governor of Rhode Island. Didn't know a whole lot more besides be a Vanderbilt. But Alfred was no small potatoes. He was the chairman and president of the New York Central Rail Lines. He's the guy that built the Vanderbilt Hotel on Park and 34th Street. And interestingly enough, he passed away in 1915. He was on board this ship that didn't make it, called the Lusitania.
Oh, and what did that lead to?
Might have been a war.
Yeah, might have been.
And there's also talk that there's long been a rumor that this Vanderbilt was also had booked passage on the Titanic and never got on. That's actually not him. It's his uncle George Vanderbilt II that booked the trip on the Titanic, according to historians today. Interesting story about Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt when Lusitania went down. The story that's told by some of the survivors is that he gave up his life vest to give to a woman who was holding a baby. It was the last life vest. He had promised her he'd find one, couldn't, so he gave him his. He couldn't swim, and so he died a hero. And that's what the surviving passengers on the ship told that story, because everyone knew who he was, so it was very obvious. So good little feather in his cap that he died doing something pretty noble. But we really couldn't have this show without a Vanderbilt, could we?
No.
And we'll get more into all the Vanderbilt railroads because they'll pop up again.
And so how is this Vanderbilt related to the ones that built the breakers? Do you know?
Okay.
'Cause
Yeah.
it was it Cornelius that built the breakers?
Well, the Commodore was the founder of the family fortune was Commodore, and he did a lot. But it really spreads out from there. I mean, the Vanderbilt family, the fortune was, 20 million here, 20 million there, and that 20 million back then is worth like $1 billion today. So the Vanderbilt family spread far and wide very quickly after Commodore Cornelius.
Yeah, I was just wondering which one built the breakers.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and
that
look.
one, that's a funny story. Between him and the it may have been anyway, whatever. Okay.
Well, since we were on famous families, in 1900 we got another famous Skull&Bones from another really rather prominent family, and that would be a gentleman by the name of Percy Rockefeller. He was a Bonesman, class of 1900, and Percy is a fun one.
Yeah, I read a lot about him in the book about Nelson Rockefeller.
You want to pull up that picture of Percy?
Sure.
There he is. It's when he's about 50 years old, looking very distinguished. Percy. Wouldn't tell the guy's a multi-billionaire, would you? He was. So what did Percy do? Well, besides being born a Rockefeller. So he's the son of William Avery Rockefeller Jr. So he's also related to Oliver Gould Jennings. We just talked about the Goulds a little bit. He's the nephew of the other co-founder of the Rockefeller family, John D. Rockefeller. He would marry a woman named Isabel Goodrich Stillman. She's the second youngest daughter of First National Citibank president James Jewett Stillman. First National Citibank is now known as Citibank, my former employer. This is the Wall Street bank that's been bailed out somewhere between 5 and 7 times so it wouldn't go insolvent.
I would imagine she's also related to the Goodrich family, which is the rubber family from back in those days.
I don't have that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm almost sure she is.
Well, there's a fun, with the Goodrich, yeah, I would imagine. I'll check it. I didn't find it in my notes, but we'll confirm that. So Percy's got a brother named William Goodsell Rockefeller, and guess who he marries? Well, his wife's sister. So we had 2 brothers married 2 sisters.
Cool.
Yeah. Percy had a daughter named Isabel Stillman Rockefeller, and she just happened to be a bridesmaid at the wedding of Prescott Bush.
Love that.
Mm-hmm. Here's a fun one. Another son was Avery Rockefeller. He founded something called Wild Wings Foundations. It was a preservation type organization with major projects in Belize and the Adirondacks.
Huh.
Uh-huh. I'm handing that one off to you. You can take that ball and run with it.
Adirondacks, really?
Well, it's the Belize part. How often do we see these foundations set up these preservation efforts all over South America? And preservation is with air quotes.
Well, what's interesting though about Belize, I'd have to, I've not ever heard of Wild Wings. I'll have to look that one up. But Belize is very interesting because there's 2 entities of all of Latin America that was never couped by the CIA. Belize is one of them that I can find, and British Guyana. And that's because they're both British colonies. So it would be interesting to see if they were staging things out of Belize because it was a protected area that they would have been able to use as a staging. But I really think it's interesting about the Adirondacks. Okay. Yeah, I definitely will have to look into that one.
I've been to Belize a couple times. It's great for scuba diving. And it's a lot of fun. You can get a massage on the beach inside a tent for like $10 for a full hour. So that's worth the trip alone after a long day of scuba diving. Fun one. A lot of people, when I work as a financial advisor, people talk about, should I invest money in Belize? And they go, well, yeah, Belize, it's a very solvent country, everything like that, and it's growing and everything like that. I go, well, let's just look at the history. I go, well, first of all, what does any country do, when they default on their debt? They start confiscating, the foreign investment. There's a long pattern of this. And people would say to me, well, Belize, it's a very strong country economically. When would they default? I go, I don't know. The last time was 2012. So, relatively recently, which means you'll be wiped out. So
his son, Avery Rockefeller, was elected director of the J. Henry Schroeder Banking Corp in 1950 in the immediate aftermath of World War II, which was the German bank that was working with I.G. Farben and all of them and the Bushes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's crazy.
Shocker. Yeah. All right. So moving on from Avery, Percy had a nephew named John Rockefeller Prentice, who would be a bonesman in 1928. Yeah, he's John Rockefeller Prentice was interesting. He got into cattle breeding, and he's the guy who pioneered artificial insemination to improve the genetic pool of the cattle. So, fun little side note. All right, so let's just see. What exactly did Percy do in his life? Well, what did he do for a living? Basically, he sat on boards. And I'm going to give you a list of a little over a dozen boards that he sat on in alphabetical order. Stop me every time you want. He was the board director of the Air Reduction Company, the American International Corporation, Atlantic Fruit Company.
So, who was in business with United Fruit, by the way?
Yes.
The two of them were basically they owned each other.
Yes.
I don't know. Did you know that?
Yeah, the incestuousness of the fruit companies was very apparent.
Yeah. So American Fruit and United Fruit and Standard Fruit all were like twisted sisters in the monopolization of farmland in Latin America to basically colonize them, which is they benefit. Although United Fruit's the one that stuck out there all the time, American Fruit or Atlantic Fruit is very much in that picture every single time too. They just kind of stay behind the scenes.
Yeah, and the conglomeration of most of those interests today is that we now call Chiquita. And the reason they changed their name is because United Fruit finally got busted for the cocaine smuggling. And they needed to restore their reputation.
Well, and they just got busted for the death squads. They were found guilty in a court in Miami in the last couple of years.
All right, more companies that Percy sat on the board of, or was the chairman of the board of. How about Anaconda Copper Mining Company?
Again?
Uh-huh.
So, of course, this guy's responsible for a bunch of the coups. So go ahead.
Okay, then we got Bethlehem Steel. Very important company when it comes to union busting and the whole labor dispute.
Yeah.
He would be on the board of directors or the chairman of Bowman Biltmore Hotels.
Cool.
Something called the Cuba Company. Something called the Chile Copper Company.
Yes, the ones that paid for the coup against Allende.
He was chairman of Consolidated Gas Company. So now he's into natural gas. Greenwich Trust Company. We're getting into title insurance. He sat on the board of W.A. Harriman and Company and Brown Brothers Harriman. He was the chairman of Mesabi Iron Company. Would eventually be the chairman of National City Bank of New York, the National City Company. New York Edison Company. North American Reassurance Company, National Surety Company, the Provident Loan Society, Remington Arms, United Electric Light and Power Company, and Western Union.
That's crazy.
That's one hell of a career, isn't it?
Well, and this is very interesting because I don't know if you haven't read Anthony Sutton's book about how like Roosevelt come to power, this surety company and the reassurance companies, they basically sell like surety bonds to governments, like city governments, state governments, so you can do contracting with them. And they use their, like Roosevelt did, use their political connections and coercion to make companies that want work from the state or local or county, whatever, affiliates to buy their bonds. So they use political pressure. They're like the mafia. So I find that interesting that he was in that on those boards.
Yeah, but if you just look at every industry he sat on, it's
all of them.
Just about
all of the ones that were used to coerce foreign countries to do what they want. You've got an arms manufacturer, you've got banking, you've got insurance. Western Union, of course, we spied on Western Union provided every telegraph and money transaction to the intelligence apparatus in the government, both before World War II and after. And this guy was in the heart of all of it.
Sitting on the board. Not just sitting, but usually chairing it.
Which is more important, obviously.
Yeah. Where's my next guy here? All right, this will be our last one for today.
Okay.
But it's a fun one. I should have ended with the Rockefeller, but this guy came a few years later, and we're doing it chronologically. All right, let's just see what this guy. We are going to introduce everyone to a gentleman by the name of Charles Seymour. Ever heard of him?
No.
That's Mr. Seymour. Very distinguished gentleman.
Oh, I do recognize his last name. Let me find out where. I got to do a search on my stuff.
Okay. So, I'll start going while you look. Oh,
go ahead. Yeah.
So you want to talk about incestuous. Charles Seymour, Skull&Bones, joined the order in 1908. His paternal great-great-grandfather is a guy by the name of Thomas Clapp, who was the president of Yale in the 1740s. He's also descended from a guy by the name of Jeremiah Day, who was the Yale president from 1817 to 1846. Keep it in the family. Seymour taught at Yale, history at Yale from 1911 to 1937, and then he became the president of Yale in 1937. So 3 people from the same bloodline were the president of Yale University, the home of the most secret of secret societies in the world, where all the blue bloods go to matriculate. All right, I'm going to skip ahead for something because when he retired from everything, it's an interesting side note. He was the curator for the papers of Edward M. House, better known as Colonel House, better known as the right-hand man or the handler for Woodrow Wilson.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because House was one of 5 U.S. commissioners to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. Prior to that, House was known as the Kingmaker in Texas. And no, he was never a colonel. He never served in the military. He just assumed the name.
Well, it was an honorary title granted to him by some people in Texas.
Yeah, I think he gave it to himself, to be honest with you. I've heard this story. He's a guy working for Wilson. He assembled what's called the Inquiry, which is a team of academic experts to devise post-war solutions. He was responsible, House was, preparing the Constitution for the League of Nations. And he served on the League of Nations Commission. He served with a guy by the name of Lord Milner.
Oh, yeah, we know that name.
Yeah, Lord Milner is one of the muckety-mucks of the British version of Skull&Bones, or the Round Table over there. That's Lord Milner. That's Cecil Rhodes. Those are these people. And that's
the Canadian Society.
Yeah, but if you go back to the Inquiry, this team of academic experts to devise post-war solutions. Well, Seymour, in 1919, as a bonesman, all he's ever done is taught history. At the time, he is, how old is he? 34 years old. He's an academic, and they send him over as the chief of the Austro-Hungarian Division of American Commission to negotiate the peace. He's also a delegate on the Romanian, Yugoslavian, and Czechoslovakian territorial commissions.
And we know what they did with those.
Yeah. And this guy's 34 years old, and he's nothing but an academic. But because he's a bonesman, he's being sent off to devise. He's a history professor, so he knows a bit. But he's over there creating, setting the tone for what the future foreign policy is going to be. So at 34, what else did he do? Oh, I don't know. He was just a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
That's where I know his name from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's your mic drop.
Yeah.
And
so he's obviously, and again, let's draw a picture from my perspective. Fabian Society, British Round Table, sets up two entities: the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, and the CFR. The RIIA and the CFR are basically the controllers of implementing the New World Order around the world. And they do that out of the City of London and out of Washington, D.C. And this guy is a founder of, and of course, Milner was on the original Fabian with Oswald Mosley and Cecil Rhodes and all of those people in that history. And so this guy is the liaison, if you will, to implement that vision that we talked about that's in Cynthia Chung's book, that vision, which gives birth to the paramilitary eventually of NATO in the stay-behinds in America. This is a pivotal guy entrusted in setting up this CFR, which of course was funded by the Rockefellers.
Yeah. And his family's just generations of, running Yale.
Yeah.
Just small little things like that.
That turn these people out.
I'm detecting a pattern.
I am too.
Well, we were up to 1908 as of today. That's pretty good. And I'm going to start grouping these on my channel by years, so it makes it easier to find.
That'd be a great idea.
We're going to jump in starting in 1908 or 9 next week. And one of the families that's going to come up is one of your favorites. And I'll just say the last name is Bundy.
Oh, like George Bundy.
Well, he's not the one we're going to start with, but
I know. Yeah, he's a little later.
Yeah, we got a lot of Bundy talk to do next week, so you can sharpen your notes on that, and that's going to take a while.
Yeah, a lot of information on that one. All right. Well, thank you for the tutorial. And I know everybody's enjoying this. I get lots of positive feedback on responses to these shows. So this has been awesome. And stay tuned because we're not done.
Oh, yeah. It's going to take I have no idea how long it's going to take, but we'll get through it.
Yeah.
And, it's so much fun for me is, I do all this research. I know these things, but I know exactly when to pause because you're just going to jump right in and just backfill so much of the story because it just feeds into the same narrative we've been both going back and forth on for years.
Yeah.
And this really, this is almost a roadmap to, we started when we first did our first show was on Operation Gladio. That's sort of like the second to last chapter of the story. And now we're going back and we're going through the entire index. And this is how we got there. Yeah.
And the one piece that I stay away from is the International Syndicate, just because it's not my area of expertise. It definitely is your area of expertise. But I think mixing the old with the new, which is what you and I are able to do, is like the perfect combination, because all of this has the background and the way in which they use that background to change the world through the use of Gladio and many other apparatuses. So yeah, it works perfectly. It's been fun. All right. So everybody take care. Any last words, Brady?
Yeah, Patriot Sarah Storm wanted to know what my channel is on Rumble. It's just one word, War Hamster. It should be pretty easy to find. A lot of fun, Colonel. And one thing I do have to say is hook 'em horns, because I will be. If I'm not here next week, that's because I'm in the morning and Ohio State won tonight. But
I don't know. I saw Ohio State the last couple of games. They're definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, they looked great against Oregon, didn't they? I mean, quite scary. And Texas is not playing their best football either. But we'll see what happens. That's why they
We'll
play the
see what
game.
happens.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.